The Zephyrian fleet commander Vextar stared at his holographic display with growing unease. 3 of his patrol ships had vanished in the Terran dead zone within the last solar cycle. No distress signals, no debris fields, nothing but empty space where proud Zephyrian vessels once flew. "Commander," his tactical officer chittered through mandibles that clicked with nervous energy. "The High Council demands answers. They say we're chasing ghosts in a graveyard." Vextar's 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the star charts. The Terran dead zone, a vast stretch of space that had been silent for over 300 years. Once, it had belonged to a species called humans. Once, it had been the heart of a small but troublesome empire that dared to resist Zephyrian expansion. But that was ancient history. The humans were extinct. Everyone knew that. The Zephyrians had made sure of it during the Great Cleansing, when they glassed every human world, turned their cities to ash, and scattered their fleets to cosmic dust. The dead zone was just that. Dead. Nothing but cold, rocks and the ghosts of a forgotten species. So why were his ships disappearing? "Sir," the communications officer's voice cracked with fear. "I'm receiving a transmission from Captain Zelmore's cruiser. They're screaming." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Through the static-filled transmission came sounds that made hardened Zephyrian warriors step back from their consoles. Metal tearing, explosions, and beneath it all, something impossible. Human voices, speaking in their dead language. Calm, controlled, professional. Target acquired. Weapons hot. For Earth. The transmission cut to silence. Vextar's blood ran cold. His species had ruled the galaxy for millennia. They had crushed dozens of civilizations, absorbed their technology, enslaved their survivors. But humans had been different. They had fought with a fury that bordered on madness, a determination that defied logic. Even when their worlds burned, they kept fighting. Even when their fleets were shattered, they rebuilt in the darkness between stars. It had taken the combined might of 3 Zephyrian armadas to finally silence them. Or so they thought. "Set course for the dead zone," Vextar commanded, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his veins. "Maximum battle readiness. And send word to the High Council. Tell them the dead may not be as dead as we believed." As his dreadnought carved through hyperspace toward humanity's former territory, Vextar couldn't shake the feeling that they were flying into something far worse than a trap. Deep in the dead zone, something vast and patient had been waiting. Something that remembered every world the Zephyrians had burned, every life they had taken. Something that had been counting the days until vengeance could finally be served cold. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as the Zephyrian fleet approached the coordinates of the last transmission. Sensors swept through the void, finding nothing but debris and radiation signatures 3 centuries old. Then, at the edge of their detection range, something appeared on the scanners. Something massive. Something that should not exist. "By the void," whispered the sensor operator. It's impossible." The structure that emerged from the cosmic darkness defied everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about human technology. It stretched across space like a metallic mountain, its hull scarred by 3 centuries of micrometeorites and radiation, yet somehow intact. A human supercarrier. Not just any carrier. This was something from their legends, their nightmares. The kind of vessel that could carry entire fleets in its belly, forge new ships from raw materials, and turn asteroids into armies. "How?" Vextar breathed, his 4 eyes locked on the impossibility before them. "We destroyed them all. Every shipyard, every factory, every human who knew how to build these monsters." Deep within the ancient vessel, systems that had slumbered for 300 years began to stir. Emergency power flickered through conduits thick with crystallized coolant. Lights blinked on in corridors that had known only darkness since the Great Cleansing. In the carrier's heart, a voice spoke into the silence, calm, human, and very much alive. "Hibernation cycle complete. Crew revival in progress. All hands to stations." The Zephyrians watched their sensors in growing horror as the dead ship came alive. Power signatures spiked across the electromagnetic spectrum. Weapon systems that should have been cold metal began drawing energy. Most terrifying of all, Launch bays that had been sealed for centuries started to open like hungry mouths. "It's not possible," Vextar's tactical officer stammered. "Humans don't live that long. Their biology was never the threat." Vextar cut him off, remembering lessons from the war archives. It was their minds, their ability to plan, to sacrifice, to think in centuries while others thought in years. Inside the carrier, Captain Sarah Chen opened her eyes for the first time in 312 years. The cryopod's lid hissed open, and she drew her first breath of recycled air that tasted of metal and determination. Around her, 10,000 other pods were opening, releasing the crew that had volunteered for humanity's longest mission. Not escape. Revenge. Sarah's first officer, Commander Marcus Torres, was already checking tactical displays with the efficiency of a man who had trained for this moment his entire adult life. "Status report," Sarah commanded, her voice hoarse but steady. "All primary systems online, Captain. The fleet is intact. 300 vessels in various stages of construction. Raw materials sufficient for 2,000 more. The Zephyrians have conveniently arrived to provide us with target practice." Sarah smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. She had been 28 when Earth burned. She had watched the orbital bombardment from a hidden facility on Luna, had seen her homeworld die in nuclear fire while she and her crew entered their pods with a simple mission: survive until you can make them pay. "Open a channel to the Zephyrian fleet," she ordered. On the bridge of the Zephyrian dreadnought, alarms screamed as an impossible signal cut through their communications array. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at a human face, scarred, determined, and very much alive. "Zephyrian forces," the human female said. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the UES Lazarus. You are trespassing in human space. You have 30 seconds to surrender before we demonstrate why you should have made sure we were actually dead." Vextar felt his secondary heart skip as the human's words sank in. Behind her, he could see other humans moving with the practiced efficiency of a military crew. Humans who should have been dust for 3 centuries. "Impossible," he whispered. "Sarah." Chen's smile widened. "We've had 300 years to think about this moment, Zephyrian. We've had 300 years to plan, and we've had 300 years to remember every single world you burned." The carrier's launch bays erupted with light as the first wave of fighters screamed into space, sleek, deadly craft that moved with inhuman precision and purpose. The human fighters moved like angry hornets released from a disturbed hive, their formation patterns unlike anything in Zephyrian tactical databases. They flew with the desperate fury of the last survivors and the cold precision of those who had nothing left to lose. "Evasive maneuvers," Vextar commanded as his fleet scattered. "Launch all fighters, target their launch bays." But the human pilots had advantages their enemies couldn't comprehend. They had been handpicked from humanity's finest, then enhanced with 3 centuries of technological development that had continued even in hibernation. Their reaction times were superhuman. Their ships were works of art disguised as instruments of war. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, call sign Phoenix, rolled his fighter through a storm of plasma fire that should have vaporized him. Instead, his craft's adaptive armor absorbed the energy and fed it back to his weapon systems. "Phoenix to all wings," he transmitted, his voice steady despite pulling 8 Gs in a turn that would have killed an unaugmented human. "Remember the doctrine. They're big, we're fast. They're many, we're better. For Earth." For Earth came the chorus from 100 fighters. The first Zephyrian cruiser died in a ballet of coordinated strikes. Human fighters swarmed it like antibodies attacking a virus, their weapons finding weak points with surgical precision. When it exploded, the shockwave scattered both debris and the remaining Zephyrian fighters. Aboard the Lazarus, Captain Chen watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. Her ship's massive manufacturing bays were already producing replacement fighters faster than the Zephyrians could destroy them. Every lost human pilot was immediately replaced by another launched from the carrier's inexhaustible belly. "Ma'am," Commander Torres reported, "the enemy is trying to withdraw. Should we pursue?" "Let them run," Sarah replied. "But make sure one of them escapes. We want them to carry word back to their High Council." On the Zephyrian flagship, Vextar watched in horror as his task force disintegrated around him. 12 ships reduced to 3 in less than an hour. The humans fought with a coordination that spoke of hive mind efficiency, but with the individual creativity that had made them so dangerous during the war. "Commander," his communications officer called out, "the human fighters are withdrawing. They're letting us leave." Vextar's blood chilled. In all his years of conquest, no enemy had ever been confident enough to let survivors escape. It meant only one thing. They wanted him to carry a message. As his damaged fleet limped away from the dead zone, Vextar stared at the sensor readings that made no sense. The human supercarrier wasn't just alive, it was growing. Construction arms were extending from its hull like metal tentacles, processing asteroid material into new ship components with impossible speed. "How many?" he whispered to himself. "How many of these monsters did they hide?" His sensor officer, voice trembling, provided an answer that turned Vextar's 4 stomachs to ice. "Sir, we're detecting 17 similar signatures across the dead zone. 17 supercarriers, all coming online." But the truth was worse than even that. In the deepest, darkest reaches of human space, where no Zephyrian patrol had ventured for centuries, 37 more carriers were stirring to life. Each one carried not just the capacity to build fleets, but the genetic banks to resurrect an entire species. Humanity had not just survived, they had planned for resurrection. As Vextar's crippled fleet fled toward home, Sarah Chen stood before the massive viewports of her ship's observation deck. Behind her, the machinery of war hummed with renewed purpose. Ahead lay the galaxy that had tried to erase her species from existence. "Status of the other carriers?" she asked Torres. All responding. Genesis, Resurrection, Vengeance, Hope. They're all coming online. Our brothers and sisters are waking up across human space. Torres paused, then added quietly, "Sarah, we're not just the last survivors anymore. We're the first wave of something bigger." Captain Chen nodded, her reflection ghost-like in the viewport. Somewhere out there, the Zephyrian Empire continued its expansion, believing humanity was extinct. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. "Signal all carriers," she commanded. "Begin Phase 2. It's time to remind the galaxy that some fires never truly die. They just wait for the right moment to burn everything down." The Zephyrian High Council chamber had never seen such chaos. Vextar's report crackled through the air as holographic displays showed impossible footage, human ships that shouldn't exist, piloted by humans who should have been dead for centuries. Supreme Overlord Kethavar, whose species had ruled the galaxy for over 2 millennia, slammed 4 of his clawed hands on the council table. "You expect us to believe that a dead species has returned to haunt us? That they've been hiding supercarriers for 300 years? "With respect, Supreme Overlord," Vextar replied through gritted mandibles, "I expect you to believe the evidence. 17 confirmed carriers, possibly more. They're not just alive, they're building. My scouts report construction activity across 50 star systems." The council chamber erupted in angry chittering and harsh clicks from a dozen different species. Each race represented had been conquered by the Zephyrians, their surviving populations integrated into the Empire as worker castes and soldiers. None had ever mounted effective resistance after their initial defeat. Humans were supposed to be no different. War Commander Zixtal, a veteran of the original human campaigns, stepped forward. His carapace bore scars from battles fought when the galaxy was younger, and his voice carried the weight of bitter experience. "I fought them before," he said, silencing the chamber. "I was there when we glassed their worlds, when we broke their fleets at the Battle of Alpha Centauri. They fought like no species we had ever encountered, not just for territory or resources, but for the right to exist. When we killed their civilians, they became more dangerous. When we destroyed their fleets, they built new ones from scrap. When we burned their worlds—" He paused, his compound eyes reflecting memories of ancient horror. "When we burned their worlds, they swore they would return from the grave to claim vengeance. We thought it was the ranting of a dying species. Perhaps we should have listened." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, humanity's resurrection continued with relentless efficiency. Captain Chen's carrier Lazarus had become the coordination hub for an operation 3 centuries in the making. Every day brought new ships online, new systems activated, new crews awakened from their long sleep. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Lazarus's chief science officer, had been working around the clock to catalog their capabilities. The numbers were staggering. "Sarah," she reported during the morning briefing, "we're not just rebuilding the old fleet. We're building something better. The manufacturing AIs have been designing and improving our technology for 300 years. Our fighters are 40% faster than anything the Zephyrians have. Our weapons are more efficient. Our ships are tougher." "How many ships do we have now?" Sarah asked. "Active? About 5,000, with more launching every hour. Theoretical maximum with our current resource base? 2 million vessels, ranging from fighters to dreadnoughts." Sarah felt a chill at the numbers. 2 million ships, enough to challenge the entire Zephyrian Empire. But numbers alone wouldn't be enough. They needed strategy, coordination, and most importantly, they needed to strike before the Empire could fully mobilize. "What's our intelligence situation?" she asked Commander Torres. "The Zephyrians have begun pulling fleets back from their border territories. They're concentrating their forces around their core worlds. Classic defensive posture, but it leaves their outer colonies vulnerable." Sarah studied the tactical hologram floating before them. The Zephyrian Empire sprawled across thousands of systems, its tentacles reaching into every inhabited sector of the galaxy. It was too large to conquer. Quickly, but large empires had a weakness. They were vulnerable to disruption. "We don't need to conquer them," she realized aloud. "We need to break them. Hit their supply lines, liberate their worker species, turn their own conquered races against them." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. "The genetic banks include data on every species the Zephyrians conquered. If we could contact their homeworlds, remind them what freedom looked like." "A galaxy-wide rebellion," Torres finished, "with us providing the military backbone they never had." Sarah nodded, her strategic mind already working through the possibilities. Humanity had always been at its most dangerous when fighting for others. Now they would fight not just for their own resurrection, but for the liberation of every species ground under the Zephyrian boot. "Begin Phase 3, she ordered. "It's time to remind the galaxy that some species refuse to stay dead. And some ideas are too powerful to kill." In the depths of space, 54 human supercarriers received the signal and began coordinating the largest military operation in galactic history. The dead were rising, and they remembered every injustice, every atrocity, every world that burned. The Zephyrian Empire was about to learn that extinction was not always permanent, and that humanity's greatest weapon had never been their ships or their guns. It was their refusal to surrender, even to death itself. The attack on Kepler Station came without warning. One moment the Zephyrian garrison was conducting routine patrols of the mining operation. The next moment space erupted with human fighters streaming from hidden positions throughout the asteroid field. But this time, the humans weren't alone. Commander Torres led the assault from his flagship, watching with satisfaction as the carefully planned operation unfolded. 6 months of secret communications with the enslaved Altarian miners had prepared them for this moment. When the human ships struck the Zephyrian defenses, the miners struck from within. "Phoenix Squadron, this is command," Torres transmitted to the fighter wings. "The miners have taken control of the defense platforms. You are clear to engage all remaining Zephyrian vessels." Lieutenant Morrison, now squadron leader after proving himself in dozens of battles, rolled his fighter through a complex attack pattern. "Copy that, command. All wings, remember? We're not just fighting for Earth anymore. We're fighting for everyone." The space battle was fierce but brief. The Zephyrians were caught between human ships from above and sabotage from below. Their communications were jammed, their reinforcements were delayed, and their defensive positions were compromised by the very workers they had enslaved. When the last Zephyrian ship exploded in a ball of superheated plasma, the asteroid mining station fell silent. Then, slowly, tentatively, voices began speaking in languages that hadn't been heard freely in this system for over a century. "Liberation Command, this is Kepler Station," came the transmission in accented but clear English. We are free." Torres felt his throat tighten with emotion. This was what they had fought for, what they had died for, what they had slept for 3 centuries to achieve. Not just human survival, but the liberation of every species that had suffered under Zephyrian rule. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. Human strike forces, often supported by local resistance movements, were hitting soft targets throughout the Empire's outer territories. Mining stations, agricultural worlds, manufacturing centers, all were being liberated, with devastating efficiency. The humans had learned from their own extinction. They understood that empires were not defeated by conquering capitals, but by freeing the slaves who built them. On the Zephyrian homeworld, Supreme Overlord Kethavar stared at the tactical displays in growing panic. Red markers indicated lost systems, yellow showed systems under attack, and green represented secure territory. The green was shrinking by the hour. 78 systems lost in the past month, his aide reported. Production output down 30%. 6 enslaved species have declared independence and are actively fighting our forces. How? Kethavar demanded. How are they coordinating across such vast distances? Our intelligence services report no communications between the human fleets. War Commander Zixtal, now leading the Empire's response, had a theory that chilled him to his core. They planned this, Supreme Overlord. Not just the return, but every detail. They knew which systems were lightly defended, which species were most likely to rebel, which targets would cause maximum disruption. 300 years of planning. The truth was even more sophisticated than Zixtal imagined. Aboard the Lazarus, Captain Chen was coordinating not just a military campaign, but a revolution. The ship's quantum computers were processing intelligence gathered over centuries, predicting Zephyrian responses, and adjusting tactics in real time. Ma'am, Dr. Vasquez reported, we're receiving confirmation from the Procyon Liberation Fleet. The Hegemony's Third Armada has officially declared independence from the Zephyrian Empire. They're requesting human military advisors. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. The Hegemony had been conquered only 50 years ago. Their military traditions were still intact, their anger still fresh. With human support, they could be formidable allies. Grant the request, she ordered. Send them Admiral Patel and the 7th Expeditionary Force. What's the status of Operation Cascade? On schedule, Commander Torres replied. We've made contact with liberation movements on 400 worlds. The Empire's core territories are beginning to experience supply shortages. Sarah studied the galactic map, watching the Empire's territory, fragment like breaking glass. Each liberated system inspired others to rebel. Each successful resistance movement weakened the Empire's ability to respond. It was a cascading failure, exactly as they had planned. But she knew the Zephyrians wouldn't collapse without a final desperate strike. They'll come for us soon, she told her senior staff. When an empire is dying, it always tries to kill what's killing it. Prepare for the largest fleet engagement in galactic history. In the depths of Zephyrian space, Supreme Overlord Kethavar was reaching the same conclusion. The humans had to be stopped before their revolution consumed the entire galaxy. He was authorizing the mobilization of every ship, every soldier, every weapon the Empire possessed. The final battle was coming, and the stakes were nothing less than the future of galactic civilization. Assemble the Grand Armada, he commanded. Every ship, every ally, every conscript species still loyal to us. We will crush these human ghosts once and for all, or die trying. As both sides prepared for the ultimate confrontation, the galaxy held its breath. Centuries of oppression were finally being challenged by species that had refused to accept extinction. The question was no longer whether humanity would survive. It was whether the galaxy would be free. The Grand Armada was a sight that would have broken the spirit of any conventional enemy. Over 10,000 ships from 100 conquered species, all flying under the Zephyrian banner. Dreadnoughts the size of cities, carrier fleets that blotted out stars, and enough firepower to crack planets. Supreme Overlord Kethavar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and felt a savage satisfaction. This was power, on a scale not seen since the Empire's founding. The humans, no matter how clever, could not stand against such overwhelming force. All fleets report ready, Supreme Overlord, his fleet coordinator announced. Total vessel count, 11,147 combat ships, 2,340 support vessels. Personnel, 47 million beings across 400 species. And the humans? Kethavar asked. Intelligence estimates no more than 8,000 vessels, all concentrated in the Lazarus defense network. They appear to be making their final stand at the coordinates where we first encountered them. Kethavar's mandibles clicked in anticipation. The humans were returning to their graveyard to die. How poetic. But aboard the Lazarus, Captain Sarah Chen was thinking several moves ahead. The massive viewports of her flagship's command center showed the approaching armada, a wall of metal and fury stretching across the starfield. To any observer, it would seem like an impossible battle. "Status report," she commanded, her voice as steady as it had been 3 centuries ago when Earth burned. "All 54 carriers are in position," Commander Torres reported. "Total active fleet, 47,000 vessels and counting. Manufacturing bays are operating at maximum capacity. We're launching a new ship every 37 seconds. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her science console. "Sarah, the probability calculations are clear. Even with our numerical advantage, the Grand Armada has enough firepower to break our formations. A conventional engagement will result in massive casualties on both sides." "Then it's a good thing we're not planning a conventional engagement," Sarah replied with a smile that made her senior staff nervous. The first phase of the battle began at maximum weapons range. The Grand Armada opened fire with everything they had, turning space into a storm of energy beams, plasma bolts, and missile swarms. The human fleet responded with tactical precision, their ships moving in patterns that seemed to anticipate every enemy shot. For 3 hours, the two fleets hammered each other across the void. Zephyrian ships died in spectacular explosions, but human vessels were being destroyed as well. The difference was that the humans kept launching replacements. On the Eternal Dominion, Kethvar watched his fleet coordination displays with growing confusion. "Their numbers aren't decreasing," he observed. "How are they replacing ships so quickly?" War Commander Zixtal had been studying the tactical data. "Supreme Overlord, I don't think those are ships in the conventional sense. I think they're manufacturing them in real time. The carriers aren't just launching fighters, they're building them as we fight." The implications hit Kethvar like a physical blow. The humans weren't just fighting with what they had. They were fighting with what they could make. And if their manufacturing capacity exceeded his ability to destroy ships, "All units, maximum advance," he commanded. "Break their formations. Target the carriers!" The Grand Armada lurched forward, abandoning formation discipline for a massive charge. 10,000 ships accelerated toward the human fleet, their combined thrust creating gravitational anomalies that twisted local space. Sarah Chen watched the enemy advance with calculating eyes. "Phase 2, she announced. "All carriers, execute. Protocol Resurrection." What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for millennia. The 54 human carriers didn't retreat or brace for impact. Instead, they opened like flowers, revealing construction bays that had been working for months not just on ships, but on something far more ambitious. 54 massive shipyard structures emerged from the carriers' hulls, each one larger than most space stations. As they deployed, they began connecting to each other through energy conduits and matter streams, forming a construction matrix that spanned thousands of cubic kilometers. "By the void," Kethvar whispered. "What are they building?" Dr. Vasquez provided the answer as she monitored the construction process. "A mobile shipyard network capable of producing dreadnought-class vessels in hours instead of years. We're not just fighting them, Supreme Overlord. We're showing them what industrial warfare really means." The first human super dreadnoughts began emerging from the construction matrix even as the battle raged around them. Ships larger than anything the Zephyrians had ever built, bristling with weapons that represented 3 centuries of technological advancement. But the most terrifying aspect wasn't their size or firepower, it was their speed of construction. Every 20 minutes, another super dreadnought rolled out of the matrix, crewed by humans who had been awakened from cryo-sleep just moments before. The tide of battle began to turn as the new ships engaged the Grand Armada with devastating effect. Zephyrian formations that had seemed unstoppable were broken apart by weapons that made their own artillery look primitive. Kethvar watched his empire's greatest military achievement crumble in real time. Ships that had taken years to build were being destroyed by vessels that had been constructed during the battle itself. "Fall back," he ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. "All units, tactical withdrawal." But Sarah Chen had one more surprise. As the Grand Armada tried to retreat, human ships didn't pursue them directly. Instead, they began broadcasting on all frequencies. Not to the Zephyrians, but to the conscripted species fighting in their ranks. Attention beings of the Altarian Republic, the Hegemony Remnant, the Outer Colonies Federation. Her voice reached across space in dozens of languages. You fight today not for your freedom, but for your oppressors. Your homeworlds are already free. Your families are already safe. You have a choice. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the Grand Armada. Entire fleet sections began breaking, away as conscripted species realized they were fighting on the wrong side. Some ships simply powered down their weapons. Others actively turned on their former Zephyrian commanders. In less than an hour, the greatest military force in galactic history had disintegrated from within. 6 months after the collapse of the Grand Armada, Captain Sarah Chen stood in the observation lounge of the Lazarus, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on New Geneva Station. The massive space habitat would house 1 million beings from dozens of species, all refugees from worlds liberated from Zephyrian rule. The galaxy looked different now. Where once the Empire's territory had been marked by the harsh geometry of oppression, new nations were forming. The Altarian Republic had been reborn. The hegemony had reclaimed their ancient borders. Dozens of other species were rebuilding civilizations that had been dormant for centuries. Final casualty reports, ma'am, Commander Torres said as he approached with a datapad. His voice carried the weight of both triumph and loss. Sarah took the pad, scanning numbers that represented individual lives rather than statistics. How many of our people didn't make it home? 47,812 crew members across all carriers. But Sarah. Torres paused, choosing his words carefully. We awakened 2.3 million from cryosleep. And the genetic banks are producing new generations at unprecedented rates. Humanity isn't just surviving. We're thriving. Through the viewport, Sarah could see ships from a dozen species working together to build infrastructure, trade routes, and communication networks. The Zephyrian Empire hadn't just fallen. It had been replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history, a voluntary alliance of free species. Dr. Vasquez joined them at the viewport, carrying her own reports. The Galactic Liberation Council has officially requested that we serve as the military backbone for their new constitution, she announced. They want humanity to guarantee the independence of all member species. Sarah considered this carefully. The irony wasn't lost on her. The species that had been targeted for extinction was now being asked to prevent future genocides. What's our response? Torres asked. We accept, Sarah decided. But not as conquerors, as guardians. We'll protect the freedom of others, but we won't rule them. The galaxy has had enough of empires. In the ruins of the former Zephyrian capital, Supreme Overlord Kethvar sat in a detention cell aboard a human vessel. The trials were about to begin, not just for war crimes, but for crimes against entire civilizations. He would face justice administered by the species he had tried to erase. But as he awaited his fate, he found himself thinking not about the past, but about what the humans had accomplished. They had done more than survive extinction. They had transformed defeat into liberation for billions of beings. Perhaps that was what had made them so dangerous all along. Not their weapons or their ships, but their refusal to accept that some things couldn't be changed. Months later, on a world that had once been a Zephyrian factory planet and was now a thriving agricultural colony, children from dozens of species played together in parks that had been built where weapons factories once stood. They spoke a dozen languages, but they all knew the story. The story of the species that refused to die, that slept for 3 centuries to wake up at exactly the right moment, that turned their own extinction into the liberation of a galaxy. The story of humanity's greatest victory, not over their enemies, but over the idea that evil was permanent and freedom was impossible. Captain Sarah Chen, now Admiral of the Galactic Defense Force, kept a picture on her desk of Earth as it had been before the burning. Blue skies, green continents, white clouds, swirling over oceans that reflected the light of a yellow sun. Someday, when the galaxy was truly stable, they would rebuild it. They would bring their homeworld back from the ashes, not as it was, but as it could be. But for now, they had work to do. Ships to build, species to protect, and freedom to guarantee. The dead had risen, the oppressed were free, and the stars themselves seemed brighter. Humanity was home. The end.